This is going to be practice number 3 video. If you remember, and if you haven't checked it out, you can go ahead. My first practice number 1 video was playing scales and some exercises to help stretch out my fingers and loosen up the muscles in my hand as well. Practice number 2 video started getting into playing chords, and it was based on this Mel Bay's children's guitar chord book, which I said I really think it should be named Beginner's Guitar Chord Book. And that's what I will refer to it as. But we did pick up some easy chords, playing C, easy C chord, easy G chord, easy G7 chord. Then we got into playing some more involved open chords with a D and D7 chord that involved using 3 fingers rather than just 1. I'm not going to get into explaining any of the fingerings at this point. I will put up pictures of the pages within the book and that contain the name of the chord, how to properly play the chord, what fingers should go where on what strings at what fret, and an exercise at the bottom of that particular page that introduces us to strumming and playing that particular chord with other chords. So let's get into it. This first one, after going over the D7 and D chords, is an A7 chord. And let's go over the exercise at the bottom. I'm going to try to voice out. Again, we're going to want to be thinking about the chord that's going to be coming next that we need to play while we're playing the chord we should be playing at any given time, and how to properly finger that particular chord that's coming next. So I'll try to say out loud the chord that is coming next before getting to it. But if we start out with a C chord, A7, D, D7, G, G7, C. The next one is an A minor chord. So A7, A minor. Going down to the exercise C, starting off with, again, A minor, D, A7, D7, G, G7, C. So we really have a lot of chords that we've learned into practice. Going over to the next one, we have a D minor chord. Let's take a look at that one. And go over the exercise at the bottom of that page. Again, starting with the C chord. A minor, D minor, A7, D, D7, G, G7, C. The next one is an E7 chord. Again, starting with this, for the exercise, starting with the C chord. E7, A minor, D minor, A7, D, D7, G, G7, So again, I'm really focusing on preparing myself for the chord that's coming next before finishing the strumming of what I'm currently playing and how to finger that chord properly. One other thing I'm going to throw in at this point, since the book has gone over some of the A chords and E chords, when I originally was taking my lessons, and I very much was taught by my guitar teacher in a similar way that I'm going over here. I don't believe we use this exact book, but he did go over different ways to play different open chords, and he did tell me to focus on, pay attention to, and really emphasize remembering all the various E chords and A chords. Later, when he went into teaching me something else, I realized why he was emphasizing that. But if you're following along, I'll do the same thing. There will be a point to it. But you want to remember and memorize all of these chords, but emphasize above all the E variations and the A variations. I'm going back and kind of, let's see, the A variations up to this point have been A7 and A minor. And we just got into an E7 chord. There will be more, and you really want to focus on those A and E chords. Moving on from this E7 chord exercise, we go to a full open A chord. Now, if you look at the picture that I'm going to put up, you're going to notice that the suggestion on how to play this is with your index finger, middle finger, and ring finger, respectively, where the picture is showing they should be played on the second fret. That is not how I play them. I was taught to use my middle finger, ring finger, and pinky. There's a couple of reasons for this. Number one, you're replacing the index finger with your pinky, and you're trying to jam 3 fingers into a very small area on the second fret, and your pinky is smaller than your index finger. So the other two are going to be used either way you play this, the middle finger and the ring finger. And by replacing the index finger with the pinky, it makes it a little bit easier, just because it's a smaller finger. But you do what's easiest for you. That's the way I was taught and the way I play it, with the middle finger, ring finger, and pinky. And let's go ahead and do the exercise at the bottom of the page using this C chord to start off with, using the C chord to start off with, E7, A minor, D minor, A, A7, D, D7, G, G7, C. And then we're going to move over to the next page where now it's going into playing a full C chord. So at this point, if you're still playing along and using that EZ C chord, let's replace that at this point on with this full C chord. And go over the exercise. Going to again start with the C, E7, G7, G, G7, C. Now the next page, it goes into full chord versions of what it previously had only shown the easy chord version of. You can see we have the full G7 chord and the full G chord. And again, this full G chord, let me show you. That's not how I was taught to play a full G chord. Again, this is using the middle finger, ring finger, and pinky. Now, when you take into account that it's showing this way to play the G chord, and you take a good look at that G7 chord, it's really easy to switch this way from one to the other, because you're basically in the full G7 chord, you're using your index finger up on the first fret of the high E string. The full G chord, you're simply pushing down on that same high E string at the third fret with your pinky. The other two fingers are staying exactly where they were to play the G7 chord. G7, G, G7. Now, playing the full G chord, I was always taught to use the index or pointer finger on the A string on the second fret, middle finger on the low E string on the third fret, and my ring finger on the high E string, third fret. Now this does make for a very difficult transition between the G7 chord and the G. You really have to move the fingers a much farther distance than if you were fingering the full G chord the way it shows here. So again, you do what is easiest for you. It's just, I was shown the full G chord being played like this. And I've always just considered it somewhat of a challenge to go ahead and try to get that transition down. Like I said, it's not easy going from a full G7 chord, which I do play the exact same way it shows here, but then going to a G chord the way I was taught to do a G chord. That's a lot of movement there. And what I've really noticed is I really have to reposition my thumb on the back of the neck in order to go from a G7 to a G. And as you can also see, my elbow is going from pointing way in to play that G7 chord to going back out to play the G chord. So there's a lot of arm, finger, hand movement going on there. But I am kind of used to doing it that way, or going over those two previous periods of playing the guitar and how I was taught to do it. This is what I did. But you do what's easiest for you. But let's get to that exercise at the bottom of this page. Starting with the C chord again, A minor, D, A7, D7, G, G7, C. Moving on, we go to an E minor chord. Again, really want to remember those A chord variations and E chord variations. Here's an E chord variation with the E minor chord. Starting with the C chord, E minor, B7, A, A7, D, D7, G, G7, C, the way I do it, G7, G, E minor. The next one, B7 chord. This is kind of a hard one. We're jamming 4 fingers into a very small area. I'm going to show that. Really just work on getting the fingers on the strings that they need to go on and trying not to mute any of the strings next to each other by touching a string that a particular finger really shouldn't be touching. If you go through each string individually, and you'll hear it if you're muting it, try to get those fingers positioned nice and curled, not overlapping onto strings that they shouldn't be touching. It's difficult. Once we got that, let's move on to the exercise. It seems like we're always starting with the C chord. B7, E minor, A minor, D minor, E7, A, A7, D, D7, G, G7, C. That's a hard one, that B7 chord. Really, really getting all those fingers in that short, small area and not accidentally hitting strings, more than one string, with the individual fingers placed where they need to go. That's not easy. But moving on to the E chord, again, really want to remember this one. B7, E. Now, at this point, I kind of want to point out, I believe there's a reason that Mel Bay, in producing this book and these exercises and learning the chords in the order that they're showing them, I believe there's a rhyme and reason to doing it. It may seem to make more sense to learn an E chord before you learn a variation of the E chord, like E7 or E minor. But I believe that they're doing this for a reason, and it's to show you the way chords progress and played one right after the other, complement each other in certain ways. That's what I think. But getting back to this E chord, let's go down to the exercise. Again, starting with C, E minor, there's that B7, E, A minor, D minor, E7, A, A7, D, D7, G, G7, C. Now those are the last 3 chords that I'm strumming the way I'm hearing them in my head. That G, G7, C. There's definitely a makes sense pattern that I'm hearing when I play those chords together. G, G7, C, G, G7, C. Again, I think there's a method to the madness within the book. I'm going to trust it, since I don't know enough about chord progressions and how they're built. I don't know. But this one is actually really good. This is an F chord, and it's the first chord that we're going to learn where we're playing more than one note, covering more than one string with one finger. It's a type of barring. That's basically what barring is. You're going to be playing multiple strings with one finger, holding down multiple strings with one finger. With the F chord, you can see with your index finger, you're holding down the high E and B string at the first fret. You're going to add your middle finger on the second fret on the G string, and then your ring finger on the D string at the third fret. But for the first time, we're holding down more than one string with one finger, and that's a type of barring. This F chord. Make yourself used to that before moving on to the exercise. For right now, let's move on to the exercise. Again, we're going to start with that C chord. F, C, E minor, B7, E, A minor, D minor, E7, A7, D, D7, G, F, G7, C, G, F, G7, C, G, F, G7, C. Again, kind of like how that G7, C pattern really sounded really good. This does too. The G with the F in there now between the G and the G7. But moving on, we have the C7 chord. Very, as far as getting a lot of fingers into a pretty small area, similar to the B7 chord. But basically, if you look at it and remember the C chord, we're basically just throwing our pinky in there on the third fret on the G string. So C, and then put your pinky down. C7. So it's not that different from the C chord at all. But again, with the exercise, starting on the C chord, C7, F, C, E minor, B7, E, A minor, D minor, E7, A7, D, D7, G, G7, C7. I found that a little bit hard. I'm going to go over that in go through that slowly. D7, G, G7, C7, F, C. Now I know that what I'm having troubles with struggling is that G7, where the index finger is way over here on the high E string, and the other two fingers are on the low two strings, A and E string. And simultaneously, to play that C7, I have to move my index finger this way to the second string, to the B string, E to B, but then these two fingers have to go this way. And get that pinky thrown down there. And I know I'm having a hard time processing moving my index finger in one direction, my middle finger and ring finger in the opposite direction, and getting that pinky down. That's a lot for me anyway to process, but that's what practicing is for. Moving on, we have the B flat chord. So C7, B flat, exercise starting with C, C7, F, B flat, F, C, E minor, B7, E, A minor, D minor, E7, A, D, D7, G, G7, C7, F, B flat, F, G7, C. That's a lot of chords. Take your time, work on each one individually, memorizing the name and the fingering before moving on to any exercise. Now we have a really interesting thing here. We're going to get into key of chord progressions. This first one is the key of C, and you're going to notice how really well these chords in this order go together. C, E minor, A minor, D minor, G7, C. Really pretty order, progression. C, E minor, A minor, D minor, G7, C. Really pretty. Now for this next one, we have to learn a new chord, this B minor chord. Remember we learned B flat, that was this. Now we have this B minor chord. We need to know it for this key of G chord progression, which goes G, B minor, E minor, A minor, D7, G. Now we knew the G and the E minor and A minor and the D7 and the G, but we have this new B minor chord. So let's go through that one more time. G, B minor, E minor, A minor, D7, F sharp minor chord. Now we're getting into barring again. We're not just playing and holding down 2 strings with our index finger. This one we're going to be holding down 3 strings with our index finger. And we need to know this one for this key of D chord progression, which starts on D. F sharp minor. Now we're also going to use the B minor, E minor, A7, D, D, F sharp minor, B minor, E minor, A7, so we've really covered a lot of new chords here, in addition to that practice number 2 video. If at any point you need to stop the video and just focus on really going over a particular chord, that is an awesome idea. Especially, like I said, you get into those, that B7 chord, my God. All of those fingers in that little area, that's take without muting strings. That takes practice. All of these take a considerable amount of practice. But moving on from that F sharp minor chord, in that key of D chord progression, we have another new chord here, a C sharp minor chord. This one just like jumps out at me as being just a super pretty, beautiful chord. C sharp minor. But we're going to be utilizing, for this key of A chord progression exercise, quite a few of the chords we just now recently learned. The B minor chord, that F sharp minor chord, and now this C sharp minor chord. There's only 2 other chords in this exercise that we knew from a while ago, the A chord and the E7 chord. But let's go through it slowly. Key of A chord progression, starting with the A chord. C sharp minor, F sharp minor, B minor, E7, A. Isn't that pretty? I mean, wow. This is the fun part for me anyway. It's so good to play something that beautiful. I think. Wow, I really love it. Last couple of chords we're going to learn here on this page. The G sharp minor chord, which is basically take exactly the way we learned to play the F sharp minor chord. Again, it's this barring of 3 strings with your index finger and your ring finger, 2 frets higher up. This was the F sharp minor chord. We're going to go 2 frets higher, and we have a G sharp minor chord. We don't change the positioning of our fingers at all. F sharp minor, G sharp minor. Now, for some reason, it goes at the bottom of the page and shows a G minor chord. And it doesn't show the ring finger, 2 frets higher. And I am, quite honestly, confused by that. It's only showing at the 3rd fret, barring across the high 3 strings, E, B, and G, with your index finger. At this point, since we learned using the ring finger for F sharp minor and G sharp minor, when we go to play G minor chord, we're going to be, that's the 3rd fret, right in between the F sharp minor and G sharp minor. 3rd fret, keep that ring finger down. But going back to that G sharp minor chord and using it for this key of E chord progression exercise, which starts with an E chord. G sharp minor, C sharp minor, F sharp minor, B7, remember that? E, E, G sharp minor, C sharp minor, F sharp minor, B7, E. And then, like I said, I would play this G minor chord the same way it showed playing F sharp minor and G sharp minor. But it's used for this key of F chord progression. F, A minor, D minor, G minor, C7, remember that one? F, A minor, D minor, G minor, C7. That was better. So we've got a whole bunch of chords that we can make ourselves familiar with, learning the names of them and how to play them. This is going to lead us to being able to play a pretty highly known rock song. Pop, rock, whatever you want to call it. But if you're familiar with the Eagles and you're familiar with Hotel California, after going through and really practicing and making ourselves familiar with these chords, we're going to be getting into playing a song. I'm going to wait for the next video to do that. Get some practicing under your belt, familiarizing yourselves with these chords, emphasizing once again, really pay attention to those A chord variations and E chord variations. But one other thing that's going to be necessary to move on and play Hotel California, we're not going to play it. It's not going to be, we're not going to pick through it the way that it is on the recording of the song. It's going to be strumming along with the chords that go with the song Hotel California. But to be more familiar with the key that it's in, you're going to need a capo. I have two styles of capos here. They work the exact same way. One is spring-loaded and has a handle that gets pressed in to do the clamping on the neck of the guitar. This is manufactured by a company called Kaiser, and this one is manufactured by Planet Waves, which is, I believe, a division of Diodario. But it's a knob, a screw that needs to be tightened down to do the clamping. So there's a little bit more involved with the clamping on this one, but they both work great. And for getting into learning eventually how to play Hotel California, that capo is going to need to be used at the 2nd fret. And basically what a capo does, it just replaces the nut of the guitar up here. At whatever fret you want to use it at, depending on the key you want to play a particular song in. For Hotel California, it's going to be used on the 2nd fret. The spring-loaded clamp one would go just like that. And when it asks to play a particular chord for any given song, not just Hotel California, but let's say one of the chords that we learned was an open G chord, right? Get rid of the capo. And this was a G chord. But playing it in a different key and using this capo at the 2nd fret, we're going to finger that G chord exactly the same way, but relative to where the capo is, but play it the same way you would relative to the nut, but farther up from the capo. The capo is now the nut, but it's like this, the same way it was being done before. But of course, we're going to get a very different sound. So with the capo at the 2nd fret, and the capo now being the nut, that G chord played relative to the capo and its positioning is going to be the exact same thing but producing a very different sound. We didn't change where we're putting our fingers. 2 and 3 frets up from the nut. Now with the capo at the 2nd, 2 and 3 frets up from the capo in the exact same, on this exact same strings. And again, it doesn't matter. You could use a spring-loaded clamp one, Planet Waves one that screws down at the 2nd fret rather than spring-loaded. Takes a little bit more time to do it, but it works the same way. It's a clamp that replaces the nut. G chord relative to where the capo was placed. G chord without a capo. Just changes the key that it's in. So, practice those chords. And remember, can't emphasize this enough, have fun. Believe me, playing Hotel California, being able to strum along with it is going to be